Let's do a little bit of sort of distant Super Bowl wrap up now that we have had some time to think about it. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there are three big things that I really wanted to get into just because I think they have all grown legs in the week and a half since the Super Bowl. And probably the first of which is Kyle Shanahan's decision in overtime to take the ball. And again, everyone is opined on this. Travis Kelce and a lot of Chiefs have basically made fun of the 49ers for taking the ball and all that. But I actually spoke to two analytics people in the league and then an independent analytics person who I quoted in my column this week, who basically said, look, the NFL's done a great job in writing the rules of overtime for playoff games to make it incredibly equal to both sides. And he said, if push comes to shove, if I had to make a choice, I would have done what Kyle Shanahan did. This is a guy who's contracted to work for 5 NFL teams, who shares his data with them. But, and look, we can all have opinions about, oh, you got to take the ball second and everything. But the point of this is very, very simple. If the game is tied after 2 possessions, you got the ball, probably at your 25-yard line, and it's sudden death. Next score wins. So I understand why Shanahan did it. I know that, when you win, you get to basically say, oh, what a dumb decision that was to do it. But I'm curious. We have not spoken about it, and I don't know what your opinion was. What did you think?
Well, I understand it from Kyle Shanahan's perspective, because if you take it first, then this is something you sort of brought up in the intro to this, right? You have an opportunity to have a match point and get off the field, and then you win. Now, is that more difficult when you're playing somebody like a Patrick Mahomes than the Kansas City Chiefs offense? Absolutely it is. But I think when you are trying to dictate the terms, then you do get to do that if you score first. Now, the opposite of that is, obviously, if you're the Chiefs, then you have a plan to say, okay, well, we want the ball second. We want to go down the field because we then know how much we need in order to try and win. And from everything that the players were saying, it's okay, well, if they do score a touchdown, then we go down the field and we try to go for 2, and that's how we dictate it. So I do understand that there are 2 sides to this, right? I mean, I personally would go more with what the Chiefs wanted to do, but I think that it's not like we're going through this and Kyle Shanahan had no plan, right? I think the difference is the players on Kansas City's side all knew what the plan was. Right. The players on San Francisco did not all know exactly what the plan was from Kyle Shanahan.
You can definitely find fault with Kyle Shanahan for that part of it, Myles. You're absolutely right.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's where I think the difference is in sort of the mentality once you get into the overtime, right? I mean, if you got Kyle Juszczyk, who's been on this team for a long time, one of the team leaders, and he says, oh, if we score a touchdown, the game goes on. I didn't know that. And he's on the field saying that, like, that to me is a little bit of a problem. Whereas on Kansas City side, everybody knew, okay, this is what it is. This is what we're doing. This is how we're going to go win. That's where I think we find fault more than the decision in and of itself.
Yeah, I would agree with you totally. When you have 2 weeks before a game to prepare for this game, and you have meeting on top of meeting on top of meeting, you need to spend a half hour one day to explain the rules of overtime. And Myles, how many people in the media, I can't tell you how many emails I got to my column that said, I can't believe how calm and relaxed Kansas City was in the last minute of overtime. What's wrong with them? Why weren't they using their timeouts? And people just didn't understand, even though I thought Jim Nantz did a very good job. When I rewatched the game, Nantz did a good job of explaining essentially that it was a brand new game. You played until the game is over. Yeah, you had a clock running, but it didn't matter. It's just like it's the end of the first quarter and you're going to the second quarter. There's that. The one final thing I would say about this decision, San Francisco defense was on the field for 39 snaps in the second half, including 11 snaps right before the flip of the coin. Now, the 49ers did go out and kneel on it. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Brock Purdy just kneeled down on the last play in regulation. Mm-hmm. So, but still, that defense, and look, you would have to ask each player at the end of the fourth quarter, were you gassed? Did you need a break? I could just imagine, Myles, it's just me, but I could just imagine if the 49ers went out there and the Kansas City Chiefs just went right through them like they're not even there. I can just imagine all the criticisms of Kyle Shanahan, basically with people saying, don't you know your own team? Your defense was gassed. That's why they were paper mache at the start of overtime. So anyway, look, much has been discussed about that. I think we both gave our opinions there and blah, blah, blah. So I have one big problem right now, and it's going to lead into what I'd do if I were the 49ers entering this offseason. And that is the 49ers have some desperate needs on that team, but nowhere, not desperate, have some big needs on that team, but nowhere, in my opinion, is it bigger than on the offensive line. So Next Gen Stats, who I have used all of this year, had a great stat that they gave me after the game, and that was this. The San Francisco 49ers allowed 9 unblocked pressures of Brock Purdy in this game. Now think about that for a second. Okay, Kansas City led the NFL this year in most unblocked pressures generated by their defense. The most they ever had in a game all year was 7. In the Super Bowl, they had 9, including 2 of the most important plays of the game. Play at the end of regulation when Trent McDuffie came in unblocked at the 2-minute warning, deflected the pass, caused the 49ers to kick a field goal, leaving Kansas City all the time in the world to come down the field and to tie it and to send it into overtime. That's number 1. And then obviously on the 3rd and 4.5 at the 9-yard line in overtime, where Chris Jones comes in unblocked. The guard and the tackle totally got confused on the right side of the line. He comes in unblocked, and therefore he causes Brock Purdy to not be able to take the time to hit what would have been a wide open Juwan Jennings. So that, to me, if I'm looking at sort of a global story for the 49ers coming out of that game, I thought their offensive line killed them. And that really was bothersome, in my opinion, as you consider why they didn't win this game.
Yeah, Peter, I would put the McDuffie pressure almost more on just Spags out scheming Kyle Shanahan in that particular spot. And I remember thinking coming out of the 2-minute warning, right, the Chiefs need to get a free rusher here. That's the only way that you're going to be able to stop whatever this play is if you get the free rusher. And McDuffie did an incredible job of disguising it. And then he comes in and, he messes up that play. He blows that thing up. That I think is a great job and a great call by Spags, and something that, you explained really well in the column. But the Chris Jones pressure there in overtime, that one, to me, that cannot happen. You cannot have a free rusher coming through the interior of the offensive line on that particular play. Absolutely, it's inexcusable. And so that's where, I think that you need to be able to do something there where you can say, let's take a look at the offensive line and why this kind of miscommunication would happen in this big of a spot, because that's not something that you would expect, right? I mean, yeah, Kansas City does a great job of getting free rushers, but at that point, you need to know where 95 is at all times. And if he's going to blow up the play, make him earn it. I mean, he can do it anyway.
Yes.
But if you allow him to, if you just open the gate and allow him to go through, I mean, well, what the hell do you think he's going to do? It's going to end up like that. So, yeah, the McDuffie pressure, that one's tough, you know. But the one in overtime with Chris Jones, that one's inexcusable.
I'll tell you what I love about the McDuffie pressure. I spoke to Steve Spagnuolo on Saturday, so 6 days after the game, and he said to me, hey, he said, Pete, I got a good story for you. I said, good. I love good stories. And he proceeded to tell me that he had one call, which basically was the call getting pressure with 4 that they did on the Chris Jones rush in overtime, you know, where he comes in unblocked. He said it was going to be that, you know, that play was going to be the play we were going to use. But the 49ers got it down to the 2-minute warning, and I started to think to myself, and I said, you know, I might like this play better where we design it for McDuffie, hopefully to come in unblocked, depending on how else we rush the 49ers on that play. And so he said, you know, the time is going down in the 2-minute warning. And he said, I have communication right there with Nick Bolton, who's his defensive signal caller, number 32, middle linebacker. And he goes, Nick, what do you think of this play? And he tells him the play they ended up running with McDuffie coming free. He says, what do you think of this play? And Bolton doesn't have the ability to talk back to him, but Spagnuolo said, and for those of you who are watching this pod, he said Bolton went just like this, nodding significantly, nodding enthusiastically up and down. So he knew, he said, okay, we're going to run that one, and it worked. It just says to me a lot about the chemistry between the coordinator and his defensive players. The last thing I want to get into on this segment, Myles, is every previous repeat champion did not, in the Super Bowl era, did not make the Super Bowl the next year. Never mind, never won the Super Bowl the next year. They didn't even play in the Super Bowl next year. There have been 8 of them, and so none of the 8 made the Super Bowl the following year. And Myles, I get into it a little bit with Patrick Mahomes coming up here in a minute, but give me your thoughts on whether Kansas City can finally be that one team.
Well, if anybody can do it, it's that guy we're going to hear from in a minute. It's 15. It's Patrick Mahomes. His greatness and his motivation to be great is off the charts. So I think one of the things we have to think about too is that this Kansas City team should get better next year, right? This was the worst offense of the Patrick Mahomes era with Kansas City. They had a bunch of unreliable receivers. They found some reliable targets in the postseason, but you've got to think Brett Veach is going to come up with something to improve that receiving core. He's going to come up with something to improve that offense. That's what he's done every time there's been some sort of lapse, right? I mean, you think about after 2020, what do? Well, they go and they totally revamp the offensive line. Okay, so that's something that they had to address. You know, whether it was defensively, they had to get a little bit younger. They had to revamp the secondary. They did that, and they won the Super Bowl last year. You know, in terms of getting rid of Tyreek Hill, trading Tyreek Hill and getting picks out of that. Like they've been able to refresh every single year. So that's why I would anticipate that they'll be better offensively next year. Now, this is going to be extraordinarily difficult because it's now 2 years in a row that you've had the shortest offseason of anybody, right? And that doesn't make things easier, you know, and you're going to have an even bigger target on your backs, and that division should be a little bit better. So it's not going to be easy, but I think that if there's any team that could do it, Yeah, it's the Chiefs, and I would at least expect them to be in the postseason next year. And once you get there, all bets are off, as we saw this year.
Miles, a couple of things about what faces Kansas City and what Kansas City has accomplished. So I remember the day 22 months ago that Tyreek Hill was traded to the Miami Dolphins. And when he went to Miami, there was a lot of, I would say, hand-wringing in Kansas City. Who's going to replace Tyreek Hill? And do you realize that over the last 2 years, Kansas City, and now think of this too, the season is 17 games long now, not 16.
Right.
But in 2 complete seasons, Kansas City has not had in either season a 1,000-yard wide receiver and has not had in either season a 1,000-yard rusher.
Mm-hmm.
So what this says to me, as this team has gone 7-0 in the playoffs, 32-9 overall, obviously far and away the best team in football over the last 2 years. What it says to me is that, and again, with all due respect to Tyreek Hill, because he is a tremendous football player, part of having Tyreek Hill on your team is also trying to figure out ways every game you're going to get him the ball.
Yes.
And that has changed. And look, not necessarily for the better all the time, but it has taken a little bit of a mental toll away from Patrick Mahomes, because he knew, Andy Reid knew, if you don't get Tyreek the ball, sometimes he's going to have little mini tantrums. And that now has gone away. And even though there isn't a superstar receiver on the team, you have a great tight end, you have a really good at times running back when he's healthy in Isaiah Pacheco, and you have a burgeoning, very good player, if not star, in Rashee Rice. So I think they got a shot. And of course they have a shot. But I think particularly if they are able to bring this team back close to what it was, and if Travis Kelce can have one more year near his peak, then I think they have a legitimate, definite shot to win.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.